Hi everyone, Janie here. Welcome back to my garden and welcome to week 5 in my Master Gardener's training recap. So usually I film these the next day. I usually film them on Saturday. My Master Gardener's course is on Fridays and I usually need a day for my brain to kind of just relax just a little bit, just for all the information that was thrown at me the day before to kind of sink in. This week is kind of different though. This week it was much more of an overview week. This week was all about vegetable gardening and I kind of wanted to get on camera really fast and talk about it. I feel like this is just going to be easier for me to talk about it now than wait a day, because I'm not a huge veggie gardener. I'm sure you all know that. My veggie garden in my backyard is tiny. It's like absolutely nothing. And, you know, it's one of the skills that I definitely want to work on as a gardener. But it was just so funny because I could totally tell the difference in my class today between the veggie gardeners and the non-veggie gardeners. The veggie gardeners were like frantically taking notes and asking a bunch of questions. And then us non-veggie gardeners were kind of like, wait, what did she say? So it was kind of a day like that, it's great. This is what I love about gardening, is that you never finish learning and you're learning something new every day. And I feel like that I haven't even gotten to the point to really dive in to all there is to know about vegetable gardening. So this was kind of an overview day. The class today was really focused on how we as master gardeners would help out the general public. So a lot of things that the general public would most likely ask us about vegetable gardening, and then how we could answer that. So like I said, the class today was pretty much an overview of veggie gardening. It didn't get into too many specifics, and I kind of like the specifics because I feel like that's the stuff that's really helpful with gardening. But I understand why most of this class today was overview, because veggie gardening is a huge topic. Like, you can't take a huge topic like veggie gardening and distill it down into 4 hours and have that be enough time to tell us all the information we need. So I completely understand why the class was presented the way it was. So it almost left me with more questions, right? So I think I have a lot of research to do. I have a lot of things that I want to look into about veggie gardening, and I think it's going to take me a couple years to get really comfortable with veggie gardening. I have been gardening for about 3 or 4 years now, and I feel pretty comfortable with ornamental gardening. Of course, I always learn something new. Every day I'm learning something new, but you'll see I don't do a ton of veggie gardening videos because I'm just not as confident with the subject. So I'm hoping that this is kind of the beginning of me really expanding my knowledge into veggie gardening. All right, so I had to come outside. I just had to get some fresh air because I've been inside all morning. I do have a squirrel that's yelling at me across the street. So if you guys hear that, that's what it is. So the presenters started off with talking about how you would set up your veggie garden, where on your property you would want a veggie garden if you were starting from scratch, and kind of where you would want to locate it. And of course you would want to locate it in as sunny a spot as you possibly could. So they talked about the south side of your house being the best spot, and even like the south side of my house is my backyard. So I would be planting my veggie garden in my backyard, which is of course where it is. But if your south side of your house is located in your front yard, you might want to think about putting your veggie garden in your front yard just to get as much of the sunlight as you need. They were telling us that if you divide veggies up into fruits, roots, and leaf vegetables. So fruits would be like tomatoes or cucumbers. Roots would be like carrots or potatoes, and leaf would be like lettuce or something like that. So fruits need at least 8 hours of sun. Roots need on average at least 6 hours of sun. And then leafy vegetables need on average at least 4 hours of sun. So even if you're growing leafy vegetables, which are usually cool season crops, you have to think about where the sun is in the winter sky. It's much lower. You still want at least 4 hours for them to grow properly. All right, and the next thing they were talking about is the size of your veggie garden. And this is something I need to keep hearing, and I'm going to keep saying it to you all over and over again, is start small. Start small, get comfortable with it, and then expand. So I have been, kind of frustrated that my veggie garden, my kitchen garden in my backyard is so small. It is not big. There's not a lot of space, and I keep thinking, I want all these garden beds, these raised beds for this vegetable garden, but I am not a seasoned vegetable gardener. So actually my kitchen garden in my backyard is the perfect size for me to start off with. So that's what they recommended that we tell everybody, that all the public that comes up to us, is make sure that you are starting small. And then considering the layout, you want to do beds. You don't want to do rows. You want it to be all kind of stuck in one spot as opposed to one long thin line going all the way down one edge of your yard. So one of the interesting things that they started talking about was how it is a luxury for us to have ornamental gardens, right? It is a luxury for us to have lawns. It is a luxury for us to have flowers, because when people used to have gardens to feed themselves, they didn't have the luxury to spend, that much space to put lawn or that much space to put shrubs or anything like that. So it's a relatively new idea to have your vegetable garden completely separated from your ornamental garden. Your front yard looks beautiful and your backyard has the veggie garden that might be a little bit more messy. So they started talking about edible landscaping and how important that could be for the general public and for us as gardeners, which is basically combining vegetables, combining edible plants into your ornamental garden. So you pick beautiful vegetables that you can kind of put in different places, so you don't have to have one specific area for a veggie garden bed. I thought this was super interesting, especially for me that loves ornamental gardening, loves flowers, loves plants. Can I incorporate any edible landscaping into my garden? And it is definitely something that I want to work on. They did start talking about somebody who is like the master of edible landscaping, and her name is Rosalind Creasy, Creasy. Apparently she's written tons of books about this, and of course, I have been buying books like every week from Master Gardeners. I've been buying a new book, but I'm going to start looking into her. I have no recommendations. They didn't give me any specific book recommendations, but she is someone that I want to start looking into, because I think edible landscaping is the direction that I want to go in my vegetable gardening journey, because I think if you can make a vegetable garden beautiful and you can kind of, put a zucchini plant here or put, some borage over here with the beautiful flowers, I think that would be a really neat way to accent my garden with some veggies. All right, and then the presenter started talking about vegetable families, the different families that the vegetables were in. I am going to butcher the names of these families, so just be prepared. I will start with the easy ones, like the allium family. We all know that has onions, leeks, garlics, chives, and scallions. The brassica family with broccoli, bok choy, and then like the Solanaceae family, which is the nightshade family. So that's like tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, and peppers. So they were going over the families and how important it was as a vegetable gardener to understand the different types of families that the vegetables are put in, because they're going to grow similarly, and then also they're going to be susceptible to the same type of pests, and then they're also going to deplete the soil the same way. So it's important to understand which type of families each vegetable is in, just for the knowledge for you as a vegetable gardener to understand what you're working with. So I think the vegetable families is a topic that I need to learn more about, just like the botanical names. I think that once you start understanding really the nature of why this plant is in a certain family along with this plant, it's just going to make you understand the whole topic of vegetable gardening a little bit better. So it is something that I need to look into. Again, this class today was more of an overview, and they were kind of just going over everything. So I'm going to take it upon myself to research it more. And I'm telling you all of this because the presenters said it was a good thing to understand and know what type of families each vegetable belongs to, so that you understand what you're planting, what you're growing, and what you're eating. So the presenters started talking about other things that we can grow as vegetable gardeners other than just the normal ones, like tomatoes and cucumbers. So everybody grows tomatoes, everybody grows grows cucumbers. Everybody grows basil. And what they were saying is, well, for one thing, those are just, those are common. There's so many other really interesting ones that you can grow. Plus, all of those are warm season vegetable garden vegetables. There are a lot of cool season vegetables that are really great as well. And it's our job as master gardeners to make sure that we're expanding everybody's horizon. So I wrote down a whole bunch of examples. Again, as a novice veggie gardener, I don't think I will be expanding to any of these anytime soon. I think I will start with the cucumbers and the tomatoes and the peppers and all that kind of stuff. But one day I would love to try some of these stuff. It was pretty interesting what they were talking about. So they were talking about culinary herbs, right? Just different perennial and annual herbs, of course, basil and parsley and dill and borage and tarragon, all the things that you think about. One thing that they said is that I didn't know was that parsley is actually a biennial. It only lives for 2 years, which I found really interesting because I actually have a parsley plant in my backyard that is doing wonderfully right now through the winter. And so I thought, oh, well, that's great. Parsley's going to live and it's just going to be a perennial for me. And no, it's going to bolt this year and it's going to die this year. It's going to go to seed. So that was a good thing to know. I just wanted to mention that in case you all didn't know that. Then they started talking about perennial vegetables like asparagus, artichokes, and rhubarb. And, none of these I've ever tried, of course. At least here in Davis, and I know the surrounding area, we have so many artichoke plants. Everybody has like an artichoke. Every vegetable gardener has an artichoke plant in their garden. And the flowers, I know. See, I'm such a flower gardener. The flowers are absolutely beautiful. But what they were saying, for those of you who don't live in California, I guess 100% of the artichokes that come from the United States come from California. So they might not work as well for you in your garden if you don't live in California. But then there is rhubarb. Apparently we have trouble growing rhubarb because we get too hot here. It might work for those of you that don't live in warm climates. Then they started talking about edible weeds. Yes, edible weeds. I thought this was so funny. Purslane, fat hen, dandelion were some of the examples, and you can basically cut them and throw them in your salad or something like that. I was joking with the woman next to me and I was saying, I wonder if you can even purchase dandelion seeds. Like, I wonder if they're actually for sale. I have no idea. I have to check. But the presenters were saying that, yes, they're weeds. We technically call them weeds, but they're still edible and they're still good and they're still nutritious. So I don't think I'll be putting any weeds in my garden anytime soon, but they did make a good point. Then they were talking about unusual vegetables. I have my notes here, which is why I keep looking down. Romanesco, kohlrabi, which I've heard of, sweet potatoes. I don't think that that's too unique, but they said, they mentioned that. Tomatillos, salsify, I've never heard of that. Yacon, I've never heard of that one. And then Mexican sour gherkin, which I have heard of. I actually think my mom grew those. So just really interesting stuff that we can expand our horizons and, have a little bit more fun with vegetable gardening rather than just the basics. And I think the idea is to pique everybody's interest in vegetable gardening. We don't all have to just grow the same tomato, right? There's a lot of different things that we can grow, and it can be just as interesting as the other aspects of gardening as well. All right, and then talking about tomatoes, how we all grow tomatoes, they were talking about growing transplants versus seeds and the different types of seeds that you can purchase in the store. So I think we all know by now that we can only purchase non-GMO seeds. GMO seeds are only available or genetically modified organism, is that right? I'll put it right here if that's not right. Those are only commercially grown. We don't have access to them, so you don't have to worry about purchasing GMO seeds. But then seeds will be labeled as open pollinated, heirloom seeds, or hybrid seeds. And they were kind of going over, what we need to know about these different labels on seeds. So heirloom seeds are kind of like the it thing lately. Like, I love heirloom tomatoes. I think they're absolutely delicious. But growing heirloom tomatoes might not be that good of an idea for me, at least as a novice veggie gardener. For one thing, all heirlooms are open pollinated, right? I mean, open pollinated means that they're susceptible to cross pollination. So it's kind of redundant to kind of say that on a seed packet. So they're all open pollinated, but they are more difficult to grow versus like a hybrid seed that's been crossed with something. They're also more they're disease susceptible. They're more susceptible to diseases, and they might not produce as much as, say, a hybrid seed. A tomato, say you take a tomato seed and you have 2 parent tomatoes and they've been crossed for beneficial characteristics. As a vegetable gardener, it's cool to grow an heirloom variety, but it might not get you what you want. It might be a fun thing to do, but basically don't depend on a lot of productivity. Don't depend on the fact that it might not get some type of disease, or it just might not survive as well. So that was one of the things that they wanted to tell us, is make sure that we weren't too focused on, the fancy heirloom varieties of everything, because they're not all they're made out to be. It's kind of like a marketing thing. And then that other thing that they were pointing out, which I thought was hilarious, was just because it's an heirloom doesn't mean it's super interesting either, because Roma tomatoes are heirlooms and iceberg lettuce is heirlooms. The 2 most generic veggies there are, both are heirloom varieties. So yeah. So the other interesting thing about seeds that the presenters talked about was you want to read the information on the back of a vegetable seed packet, but you want to take it with a grain of salt, right? Which I found really interesting, because if I'm looking at a seed packet for flowers, I am always going to look at the dates on the back, and I'm going to follow them pretty religiously, right? On a flower seed packet, it'll say, sow 6 to 8 weeks before your last frost, or something like that. And, you pretty much want to follow that. Well, I guess for vegetable seeds, they're not as specific. And so it'll say, okay, for green beans or for peas or something, say peas, sow in June or so in May or something like that, right? Well, those recommendations could be from a seed company that's from, say, New York, which is all the way across the country from us and has a completely different climate than we do. So we would actually sow our peas in February, where somebody else across the country or halfway across the country, just somewhere else, would sow at a different time of year. So you don't always want to watch the timing or listen to the timing on the back of the seed packet. What you actually want to do is you want to find a vegetable planting calendar, some type of local vegetable planting calendar. I think you can Google like Master Gardeners, your region, vegetable planting calendar, and something should come up that's at least pretty close to you. I will put the link for ours here in the Sacramento area of California. I will put the link for ours down below. There are lots of different types of versions, but basically you want to find a regional vegetable planting calendar rather than follow what's on the seed packet, because you don't know where the seeds are from. So I thought that was an interesting piece of information to remember. All right, then they started talking about harvesting tips, which I thought was very handy and very helpful to talk about, especially because we live in a very hot climate, and the heat of the summer can really get to your plants, specifically tomatoes. If it just gets above 90 degrees, then tomatoes just really struggle. So some of the things they were saying was pick early in the morning, right? That's when the plants are going to have the most moisture and they're going to be the healthiest and last the longest. So you always want to harvest early in the morning. You want to harvest often. So again, as a flower gardener, same with flowers, you want to harvest often. You want to harvest your vegetables often. So the life cycle of a vegetable is, they're going to grow up, they're going to set flowers, they're going to set fruit, and then they're going to go to seed, and then they're going to die. And what we're trying to do as vegetable gardeners is we're trying to stretch out the part where they're setting fruit, right? So if you let them get past that step in their life cycle, they're going to think they're done and they're going to stop producing as much fruit. So harvesting often is super important for fruiting vegetables, but then also super important for leafy type vegetables like spinaches or the leafy brassicas or cut and come again lettuce. You want to keep cutting them. You want to basically keep mowing them down or picking them so the plant still knows that it's time to keep producing. And so that's one of the things that they said was super, super important, was to make sure that you were harvesting very, very often. All right, then the next topic we went on to was year-round gardening. Basically, your cool season vegetable garden and your warm season vegetable garden. And I feel like most of us focus on our warm season vegetable garden. That's the popular one. That's the tomatoes and the peppers and the basil and the cucumbers and all that fun stuff. But all of that, the warm season garden, they were making the point that that is all fruits basically that you're eating. You're eating the fruit of the plant. So the nutritional content is not as much as compared to a cool season crop like a broccoli or a cabbage, where you're eating basically the whole plant, right? And so you actually get more bang for your buck if you focus on cool season planting. And I have to say, cool season vegetable planting is something I don't even think of. Like I have a couple lettuces in the back. I have my bunny salad bar and stuff like that. But they were talking about 12 months of vegetable gardening and how to do it, how to do 2 rounds of cool season crops and 1 round of warm season crops, and then have the in between, the crops that you're going to do in between each season. And it was just so interesting to hear their ideas on that and how you can take, you can take one bed and you can just go all the way through the year, intercropping, I think, is that what it's called? Intercropping and succession planting. And they just made it sound so interesting. And again, they didn't give us any specifics. They just kind of gave us ideas and then basically was like, okay, well, go think about it, right? Because every garden is going to be different. Every climate is different. Every location is different. So you kind of have to figure out what works for you. But kind of the goal is to have 12 months of vegetable producing plants that you and your family can eat off of, which I thought was really, really cool. All right, next I'm going to talk about pest control. And this was one of those things that they were kind of doing an overview because apparently we're going to have another class all about pest control. But what they were emphasizing was pest control versus pest balance. So without spraying hardcore pesticides and herbicides and all this crazy stuff where we're trying to control absolutely everything and have these perfect vegetables for us to eat, that is going to cause so many more harmful effects for your garden, if you overcompensate to deal with the pests or the fungus or the bacteria or whatever you have in your garden. So it's kind of like a balance. They were encouraging us to think about more of a balance, and this goes towards the IPM method of pest control, which is basically go with the least toxic, the least invasive type of pest control that you can do first and see if that works to your satisfaction. And then you can kind of go from there. So I've talked about this before. I had a bug video, I want to say it was like 12 months ago or something like that. But I will link the website down below. It's the IPM website for UC Davis. And basically it will take you through a checklist. And so you can say, okay, yeah, it's these type of bugs or it's doing this damage. And then it will give you the least toxic solution for whatever pest you have in your garden, which is the whole theory behind IPM. You don't want to overcompensate and mess with the balance in your garden. So I thought that was really interesting that they were talking about that. And again, I will link that down below. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to talk about is so funny. I thought this video was going to be really, really short, but of course I sit here and I just start talking about it. The last thing I wanted to talk about was watering your vegetable garden. And I found this very, very interesting, and I'm sure it goes over for ornamental and flower gardening as well. But what they did is they started showing pictures of the root length for different vegetables. So lettuce roots, 4 feet long, beet roots, 8 feet long, tomato roots, 4 feet long, like 4 feet into the ground. Those roots are getting that deep into the ground, which is a good thing because when you have periods of drought, you want your vegetables to have a nice expansive root system so that they have more area to get moisture from and to get nutrition from. So the point of showing us all this, to show us how extensive the root systems actually were for these vegetables, was basically to say, water deeply, water infrequently, and water deeply. So I water every day during the summer, when it gets really hot and everything like that. It gets 100-something degrees around here and I'm like, okay, well, I have to water everything every day. Well, one of the presenters lives in my town and she has a vegetable garden, and she says she waters twice a week during the summer, even during the hot summer. And what she does is she does very deep soaks for her garden, for her vegetable garden. So she basically will leave her irrigation system on for a very long time. What she said is, if you're doing, like 20 minutes of irrigation, you want to do 10 minutes, take a break and let everything soak in, and then do another 10 minutes. But it's basically better to do slower and longer irrigation less frequently than it is to water frequently for just a little bit, because that water, if you water if you water frequently but just a little bit, it's going to stay only in the top couple inches, and it's not going to get all the way down to those 8-foot deep roots or 4-foot deep roots, and you're going to have plants that are not going to be able to handle drought as well. So I just found that really interesting. They really drove that point home. I'll see if I can find any pictures of that to put on here. But I think it was just a good reminder that we all need to focus on deep soaking our gardens, especially if we live in drought areas. And, we're only getting hotter, at least here in California, we're only getting hotter. So deep soaking, I think, is a really good answer and the way to go. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope I explained all this information as understandably as I possibly could. Again, I am not a skilled vegetable gardener yet. So all this information is pretty new to me, and it's pretty, I'm just not as comfortable with it as I am with the different aspects of gardening. But again, I love it. I love learning new things. I love sharing all of this with all of you. So if you guys have any suggestions, or you guys have any comments or tips or anything, leave them in the comment section below so I can have those tips. And then also everybody else watching this can have those tips as well. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a chance to get into your garden today.